The first time I heard about the Crimson Hollow, I thought it was just another themed bar trying too hard. You know the type. Dark walls, fake cobwebs, plastic fangs behind the counter. But the customer who told me this story, he wasn't talking about decorations, he was talking about something that had been living there, feeding there for years. And the worst part, the owner knew. He had always known. What started as a simple job opportunity for a bartender named Vincent Shaw became a descent into a nightmare he couldn't escape, even when he finally understood what was happening beneath the dim lights and crimson walls. Some places have a history, others have a hunger. I'm Jason Fox, and this one still haunts me. Vincent Shaw came to Savannah, Georgia in the spring of 2019. He needed a fresh start. His previous job at a sports bar in Charleston had ended badly after a disagreement with management, and he was tired of the same routine. Savannah seemed like the right place to rebuild. The city had charm, history, and enough bars to keep someone with his experience employed. He spent the first week checking out different establishments, dropping off resumes, making small talk with owners and managers. Most places were polite but non-committal. Then he found the Crimson Hollow. The bar sat on a side street near the historic district, tucked between a closed antique shop and a narrow alley that seemed to disappear into shadow. The exterior was unassuming. Brick facade, a wooden sign with faded red lettering, no flashy neon or music spilling out onto the sidewalk. Vincent pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air smelled like old leather and something faintly metallic. The lighting was low, almost too low, with red-tinted bulbs casting everything in a warm, unsettling glow. A few patrons sat scattered at tables, nursing drinks in silence. None of them looked up when he entered. Behind the bar stood a man who introduced himself as Julian Thorne. He was tall, thin, with pale skin that seemed to catch the red light in strange ways. His eyes were dark, almost black, and when he smiled at Vincent, his teeth looked unusually white. Julian mentioned that he had been looking for someone reliable, someone who could handle late hours and keep the place running smoothly. Vincent explained his experience, his willingness to start immediately, and his need for steady work. Julian listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving Vincent's face. After a long pause, he extended a hand and told Vincent the job was his if he wanted it. Vincent shook his hand. It felt cold, like marble. The first few weeks went smoothly. Vincent worked 5 nights a week, usually from 8 in the evening until 2 in the morning. The Crimson Hollow had a small but consistent crowd. Most of the regulars were quiet, polite, and tipped well. They ordered the same drinks every time. Whiskey neat, gin and tonic, red wine. Always red wine. Vincent noticed that Julian never drank. He would stand behind the bar when Vincent wasn't there, watching the room with that same unblinking intensity. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice had a smooth, almost hypnotic quality that made people lean in closer. Vincent also noticed the basement door. It was located behind the bar, reinforced with a heavy deadbolt and a lock that looked newer than anything else in the building. Julian kept the key on a chain around his neck. When Vincent asked what was down there, Julian explained it was just storage. Old liquor, archived records, things that didn't need to be touched. Vincent accepted the answer. Every bar had its locked rooms and off-limits areas. It wasn't his place to pry. But then the dreams started. Around his 4th week, Vincent began waking up in the middle of the night with a dry throat and a lingering sense of unease. He would remember fragments, red eyes watching him from the shadows, the sound of something breathing just outside his apartment door, a voice whispering his name in a language he didn't understand. He chalked it up to stress and the odd hours. Working nights could mess with your sleep schedule, make your mind play tricks. He started drinking more coffee during his shifts, trying to stay sharp. One evening in late May, a woman came into the Crimson Hollow just after midnight. She looked out of place, too anxious, too alert. She sat at the bar and ordered a vodka soda, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected someone to appear. Vincent made her drink and slid it across the counter. She thanked him and asked if the bar had been there long. Vincent mentioned that Julian had been running it for years, at least that's what he had been told. The woman leaned closer and asked if Vincent had ever seen anything strange. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Vincent felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral and told her every bar had its quirks. She didn't seem satisfied. She left 20 minutes later without finishing her drink, glancing over her shoulder as she pushed through the door. Vincent mentioned the encounter to Julian the next night. Julian's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to darken. He explained that some people came to the Crimson Hollow looking for stories, urban legends, things to post online. He asked Vincent to be polite, but not to entertain their questions. The bar valued discretion. Vincent nodded and let it go, but something about Julian's tone made his stomach tighten. Around the 2-month mark, Vincent started noticing details he had missed before. The regulars never aged. He had been seeing the same faces 5 nights a week for weeks, and none of them looked any different. No new wrinkles, no change in hair color, nothing. One man in particular, a middle-aged guy who always sat in the back corner, had a scar on his cheek that Vincent swore had faded since the first time he saw him. He mentioned it casually to another bartender who worked the occasional weekend shift, a younger guy named Ryan Caldwell. Ryan laughed and said Vincent was spending too much time in the red light. It messed with your perception. But Ryan also admitted that he never worked past midnight if he could help it. He didn't like the vibe after the clock struck 12. One night in early June, Vincent arrived for his shift and found the basement door slightly ajar. The deadbolt was still in place, but the door itself was open just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness beyond. He called out for Julian, but there was no response. The bar was empty. Too early for customers, too quiet for comfort. Vincent stood behind the counter, staring at that door, feeling a pull he couldn't explain. He walked over slowly, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The air around it felt colder, and he could hear something faint. A rhythmic sound, almost like breathing. He pushed the door open another inch and peered down into the darkness. Stone steps descended into shadow, and at the bottom, he thought he saw movement. Something pale and quick, darting out of view. The front door of the bar swung open and Vincent jumped. Julian walked in, carrying a box of supplies. He looked at Vincent, then at the open basement door, and his expression hardened. He set the box down carefully and asked Vincent if he had gone downstairs. Vincent shook his head and explained that the door was already open when he arrived. Julian moved past him without a word, pulled the door shut, and locked it with a deliberate click. He turned to Vincent and mentioned that the lock had been acting up. A repairman would be coming by soon. His tone left no room for questions. Vincent felt his pulse quicken, but he nodded and returned to his station. The next twist came 2 weeks later. Vincent was closing up around 2 in the morning when he heard footsteps above him. The bar didn't have a second floor. It was a single-story building with a basement. He froze, listening. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately, as if someone was pacing back and forth directly above the main room. Vincent grabbed a flashlight from behind the counter and walked to the back of the bar, shining the beam up at the ceiling. Nothing, just old wooden beams and faint water stains. The footsteps stopped. He stood there for a full minute, holding his breath, before finishing his closing routine and leaving as quickly as possible. Vincent started researching the Crimson Hollow online. He found very little. No reviews, no social media presence, no articles in local publications. It was as if the bar existed outside the normal grid. He did find one old forum post from 2011, buried in a thread about haunted locations in Savannah. A user mentioned a bar on the east side where people went in, but didn't always come out. The post had been deleted, but a cached version remained. Vincent read it 3 times, his hands trembling. The description matched. Same street, same red lighting, same owner, Julian Thorne. He considered quitting. The money was good, but the unease was starting to outweigh the paycheck. Then, one night in mid-July, everything changed. Vincent was restocking the bar around 11 when one of the regulars, an older woman named Diane Lawson, approached the counter. She had been coming in every Thursday for as long as Vincent had worked there. She always ordered the same glass of red wine and sat by the window, reading a book. That night she set her glass down and looked at Vincent with an expression he couldn't read. She told him he should leave. Not eventually. Now, before it was too late. Vincent asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head and returned to her seat. 20 minutes later, she was gone, leaving her book behind. Vincent picked it up. It was a collection of old folklore about creatures that fed on life force, blending into human society, hiding in plain sight. That same night, Vincent finally saw what was in the basement. He was cleaning up after last call when he heard the lock click. He turned and saw Julian standing by the basement door, key in hand. Julian looked at him and mentioned that it was time Vincent understood what the Crimson Hollow really was. Vincent's throat went dry. Julian opened the door and descended the stairs without looking back. Against every instinct, Vincent followed. The basement was larger than he expected. Stone walls, low ceiling, and a dozen narrow alcoves carved into the rock. Each alcove contained a person. Not dead, but not awake either. They lay perfectly still, eyes half open, breathing shallow. Vincent recognized some of them. Faces he had seen in the bar over the past few months. People who had come in alone and never left. Julian stood in the center of the room, his back to Vincent, and explained that the Crimson Hollow had existed for over a century. It was a haven, a place where his kind could feed without drawing attention. The patrons upstairs weren't just customers. They were donors, willing participants in an exchange. Life force for protection, safety for sustenance. Vincent backed toward the stairs, his legs weak. He asked Julian what he was. Julian turned to face him, and in the dim light, Vincent saw the truth. Julian's eyes had shifted, no longer black but glowing faintly red. His teeth, when he spoke, were sharp and unmistakable. He told Vincent that he wasn't in danger. Vincent had been chosen carefully. He had a strong presence, a resilience that made him valuable. Julian needed someone who could manage the bar, keep things running, and most importantly, keep quiet. Vincent had done well, better than the last person who had held the position. Vincent demanded to know what happened to the people in the alcoves. Julian explained that they were resting. When they woke, they would have no memory of their time below. They would leave the bar feeling refreshed, renewed, and they would return weeks later, drawn back by something they couldn't name. It was a symbiotic relationship. No one died. No one suffered. At least, not in the way Vincent imagined. Vincent asked if he had a choice. Julian smiled and told him that everyone had a choice. But leaving meant forgetting. And forgetting meant losing the past 3 months of his life. Every memory, every moment, erased. Vincent didn't sleep for 2 days. He worked his shifts on autopilot, avoiding eye contact with the regulars, flinching every time Julian appeared. He considered going to the police, but what would he say? That his boss was a vampire running a feeding operation beneath a bar in Savannah? They would laugh him out of the station. He thought about running, leaving Georgia entirely, but something kept pulling him back. A compulsion he couldn't explain. He realized with growing horror that he had been drinking the house wine. Julian had offered it to him during his second week, a welcoming gesture. Vincent had accepted, grateful for the hospitality. He hadn't thought twice about it. Around the middle of August, another employee was hired. A young woman named Alicia Brennan who needed part-time work while attending college. She was bright, energetic, and completely unaware of what she had walked into. Vincent wanted to warn her, but every time he tried to speak, the words wouldn't come. His throat would tighten, his thoughts would scatter, and he would change the subject. He realized that Julian had more control over him than he wanted to admit. The wine hadn't just been a drink. It had been a binding. One night, Alicia asked Vincent about the basement. She had heard sounds, faint voices, and she wanted to know if the building was haunted. Vincent felt the compulsion rise up, choking him, but he fought through it. He managed to tell her not to go down there. Ever. His voice came out hoarse, strained, but she heard him. She looked at him with wide eyes and nodded slowly. That small act of defiance cost him. When Julian found out, and he always found out, he called Vincent into his office. The office was a small room behind the bar, lined with old books and artifacts Vincent didn't recognize. Julian closed the door and told Vincent that defiance had consequences. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Vincent felt the weight of his words like a physical presence pressing down on his chest. The next morning, Vincent woke up with a splitting headache and no memory of how he had gotten home. His apartment was locked from the inside, but he didn't remember locking it. There were marks on his arms, faint bruises that hadn't been there the night before. He checked his phone. No calls, no messages, just a single text from Julian. "Rest well. See you tonight." Vincent stared at the screen until it went dark. For the next 2 weeks, Vincent played along. He poured drinks, made small talk, and kept his head down. But he was also planning. He started researching folklore more seriously, looking for weaknesses, patterns, anything that could give him an edge. He found references to thresholds, to invitations, to the idea that certain creatures couldn't cross into spaces they weren't welcomed. The Crimson Hollow was Julian's domain, but Vincent's apartment wasn't. He started reinforcing his door, placing salt along the windowsills, and sleeping with a knife under his pillow. It felt ridiculous, but it also felt necessary. The turning point came in early September. A man walked into the Crimson Hollow just after midnight. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He sat at the bar and ordered a whiskey, neat. Vincent served him and tried to move on, but the man leaned closer and asked if Vincent knew what kind of place this was. Vincent felt the compulsion rise again, but the man placed a hand on his wrist. The touch was warm, grounding. The compulsion faded. The man introduced himself as Graham Sinclair. He was a hunter, not the kind with rifles and camo, but the kind who tracked things that shouldn't exist. He had been following Julian Thorne for 5 years, and he knew what Vincent was going through. Graham explained that Julian wasn't invincible. He was old, powerful, but not untouchable. The key was breaking the bond. The wine Vincent had consumed created a link, a psychic tether that allowed Julian to influence his thoughts and actions. To sever it, Vincent needed to stop consuming anything from the bar and ingest a mixture of specific herbs. Graham handed him a small vial. It smelled awful, like rotting plants and vinegar. But Graham assured him it would work. Vincent had to drink it at dawn, when Julian's influence was at its weakest. Then he had to leave Savannah and never return. Julian's reach was local, tied to the city and the bar. Beyond that, Vincent would be free. Vincent took the vial and thanked him. Graham warned him that Julian would know the moment the bond was broken. He would come for Vincent. Graham couldn't stay to help. His presence would draw too much attention, but he gave Vincent one more thing. A small iron nail, old and rusted. He told Vincent to keep it on him at all times. Iron disrupted their kind, made them hesitate. It wouldn't kill Julian, but it might buy Vincent enough time to escape. That night, Vincent worked his shift with the vial hidden in his pocket and the nail tucked into his shoe. He felt Julian's eyes on him constantly, as if the man could sense the shift. When Vincent locked up and left, he walked quickly, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. He made it home without incident, locked the door, and sat on his bed, staring at the vial. He had until dawn, 6 hours. He set an alarm and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. At 5:30 in the morning, Vincent drank the mixture. It tasted even worse than it smelled, and he gagged, barely keeping it down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sharp pain lanced through his skull and he collapsed to the floor. He felt something snap, a thread severing, and the pressure that had been building in his mind for months evaporated. He gasped for air, his vision clearing. For the first time since he started working at the Crimson Hollow, his thoughts felt entirely his own. He didn't waste time. Vincent packed a single bag, grabbed his keys, and left his apartment. He drove west, away from Savannah, away from the coast, putting as much distance as he could between himself and Julian Thorne. He made it to Atlanta by mid-morning and checked into a cheap motel under a fake name. He stayed there for 3 days, barely eating, barely sleeping, waiting to see if Julian would find him. On the 4th day, he received a single text from an unknown number. "You made your choice. Don't come back." Vincent deleted the message and destroyed his old phone. Months later, Vincent was working at a bar in Nashville, Tennessee. He had rebuilt his life again, this time more carefully. He avoided places with basements, refused drinks he didn't pour himself, and never stayed in one location too long. One evening, a customer told him a story about a bar in Savannah where people went missing. Vincent's hands shook as he wiped down the counter, but he didn't say anything. He just listened. The customer mentioned that the bar had closed suddenly a few months ago. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just an empty building with a for sale sign and a faint smell of old leather. Vincent never found out what happened to Julian Thorne. He didn't want to know. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But every now and then, late at night when the bar is quiet, Vincent catches a reflection in the glass behind the bottles. A pale face, dark eyes, watching. He blinks, and it's gone. He tells himself it's just his imagination, the residual fear of someone who survived something impossible. But deep down, he knows better. Some bonds don't break cleanly. Some leave scars that never fully heal. He still keeps the iron nail in his pocket, just in case. So here's what I wonder. How many places like the Crimson Hollow are out there, hiding in plain sight? How many people walk in looking for a drink and walk out with something missing they can't even name? I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city or state in the comments. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. And it makes me think about the bars, the restaurants, the places we visit without a second thought. Have you ever felt like something was watching you in a place that should have been safe? Ever had a night where time seemed to skip and you couldn't remember how you got home? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and who knows, maybe your experience will be the next one I tell here. These stories matter. They remind us that the world is stranger than we like to admit. If this story got under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more where this came from, and trust me, some of them are even darker. Next time you walk into a bar you've never been to, pay attention to the regulars. Notice the ones who never seem to age. And if the owner offers you a drink on the house, maybe think twice before you accept. See you in the next story if you dare.